Here we go then, the BHA showdown. As Hugo Palmer said, I hope it's not a showdown. Maybe I should have said summit, where all parties are going to agree, and then Lord Allen will seamlessly take over as chair of the British Horse Racing Authority, and the authority will be restructured accordingly, and we will all be off to a land of milk and honey. Is that what's going to happen, Richard?
No, it won't, and the reason it won't, it doesn't necessarily mean an outcome won't be resolved, but we are going into those negotiations with parties coming at it from very different angles, and that's reflective of the fact they have very different business models. You were alluding to that with your chat about Hugo. Those that have shareholders that require a return are likely to be very keen to maintain some element of power at the table. However, from Lord Allen's point of view, moving into the BHA, if you feel you're going to take that job with one hand, maybe both hands tied behind your back, quicksand was mentioned, we all know racing's been bogged down, then it does need to begin to move. But we're not starting from a place where harmony and uniformity in business is where we start, and that makes it very difficult for those who feel that their business models are being targeted against by those with, you were quite right, with the more altruistic motives than maybe others have, and that's not judging one over the other, but the motives are very different.
But you used the word altruistic, and Hugo Palmer used the phrase long-term. And it's a good
answer.
Yeah, it's a very good answer, but it's a very accurate answer, isn't it? Because a PLC, and I work for one, they're not looking they're not looking at a long-term, or 10 years down the line, we'll do that. They're looking at returns to shareholders and share prices, and so their business is much more short-term in its view than a trainer who is looking years down the line.
Or the Jockey Club, or Ascot.
Absolutely, yeah. And so that's it's sort of it's easy to paint this as a sort of, you know, altruistic good guys versus the bad guys, but of course it's just a reflection of the world that we live in. We're in for
what's going to happen. How do you price it up?
Well, you need a lot of assurances for those that come in feeling that they're giving up a lot. You know, that going forward, it will reflect their ideals as well as those of the long-term benefit of the sport.
This isn't strictly on point, but it did strike me, we've had 3 or 4 months of talking about the future of the BHA, how it might be split into 2 parts, a commercial arm and a regulatory arm. There's an awful lot of people who are working there day in, day out, who will be quite anxious at the moment about their own futures. And I couldn't help sort of feeling for them as we talk about it in this rather abstracted way, that there's a significant, not human cost, but there's a significant potential human cost here.
Can I hope that one outcome of this as regards to the BHA is they are keen to free their arms a bit? You know, in terms of, the BHA do have far better people working for it than the sport give them credit for. But Julie Harrington's communication wasn't great, we all accept that. And those that have been acting on an interim basis have always been sort of, well, we can't say too much because. So I do hope that they are allowed much more input, because Brant Dunshay, Sean Parker have done pieces with them. You speak to them on an individual basis, they are forward thinking. It is just too often the BHA have been far more scared about doing something wrong than going on the front foot. So whatever the outcome, I hope that the visibility of those people, because they can play shots, they're just not given the chance.
And it was the point this week about Premier Racing being remodelled with much more of a BHA focus on what those Premier fixtures are. Is that a statement of intent that is going to encourage potential incoming chairman?
I hope so, because I would like Lord Charles Allen to take his post and for the BHA to have more power and the racecourses to have less power. But in this case of the reduction of Premier fixtures to 52, there were too many of them. I think we all agreed that in the first place. Whether that was the BHA taking charge and being the leader, or whether it was them being allowed to take charge, I don't know.
I mean, just before we move on, we've overspoken a lot on this, but it's the most important one of the week. The fixture list is the nub, isn't it? The fixture list is the nub. The ownership of those fixtures allow companies to borrow against that on their balance sheets, and that is fundamental to the running of the small independents and ARC's business models, and that shouldn't be underestimated. I don't think that can be challenged. I would like to see more courses make say 20% of your fixtures available for central planning to allow the BHA more scope to move them around. But, you know, that's a long way down the line probably.
And as I said to Hugo Palmer earlier on, you know, we've really only heard the argument articulated by those people who want major change within the BHA and want Lord Allen to take his post. And we haven't really heard the argument advanced from those who might have perfectly justifiable grievances and concerns. So it's quite difficult, really, to sit as referee on this when you're not in possession of all the arguments from every stakeholder. But hopefully some of that will become clearer after tomorrow and as we head into Goodwood, where I'm sure it will be the chat away from what's happening on the racecourse. Is a £2 million King George next year? Fliss Barnard, the Chief Executive of Ascot, revealed this to Ollie Bell on yesterday's opening show on ITV. And I wonder what impact, Dave, this might have, not just on the race itself, but on the rest of the British racing calendar and scene. Yeah,
so it's £2 million to become Britain's richest ever race, isn't it? And it's going up from 1.5 million quid. I personally I doubt that it'll make much of a difference. Yesterday, of course, we didn't have, again, the tabloids and always talk about the midsummer clash of the generations with regards to the Coral Eclipse and the King George. Yesterday, we didn't have a 3-year-old in this race. It was, for the purist, it was an interesting race. For the wider sporting public, I think it was quite a hard one to sell, to be honest. But I wonder to what extent that would increase the field. I think an extra 500 grand in the scheme of things when you're talking about planning for stallion careers, etc., I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference.
Is it enough to draw the internationals? That's the key, isn't it? And will it have an effect on the Jockey Club and York and others just to keep pushing their money up and up and up? Is it going to be a bit of an arms race?
So the wider issue, I suppose, is if I gave you £500,000 to invest, where would you stick it? And whether you stick it on the top end because you believed your international profile is important, or whether, as you say, all that leads is to you being gazumped again by the same races you were just behind. The impact on the programme, whilst pedigrees remain more in favour of 10 furlongs than 12, I don't think prize money will make a massive difference, particularly if you don't get much of the classic generation.
Would it make would it be more impactful in a race like the Coral Eclipse and the Juddmonte International than it would in the
Potentially, yes, I think it would, because I think that, you know, as regards potential stallion sales,
or indeed the Sussex Stakes.
Yeah, the 8 to 10 furlong bracket seems to be where you get the most commercial return. However, Ascot, I'm sure, would argue, as Fliss would have done, that, you know, it is more about that. Ascot is a brand that they are trying to sell, and that brand is a premium one, and so the increase in your headline race is good. Whether, as I say, it's the optimum use of 500,000, I would doubt, because I share your view. What 3-year-old could have run in that race that would have made it any better yesterday, with the Irish Derby being so late, which of course is another issue.
Yeah. How are we getting on with the campaign to axe the racing tax? The racing tax. Of course, it's not a racing tax, a tax on betting operators for their betting on racing, and you're not really asking to axe it, you're asking to maintain the status quo, which is a differential in percentage between what is paid on racing bets and what is currently paid on casino games.
Doesn't rhyme.
But it's not so catchy, is it?
Okay.
Axe the racing tax. Everyone's been asked to write to their MPs, and the MPs have said...
It's a good job the clock wasn't ticking when you went through.
Exactly. Look, still 153.
Talk about. The MPs have said... Well, the Racing Post survey, I'm just consulting my notes, this was of MPs who have constituencies either with a training centre or a racecourse. Yeah. Only 6 of the 23 Labour MPs responded to the Racing Post survey. Nearly all of the Conservative MPs, I think, did, and they were opposed to the levelling of the duty rates. 15%, of course, for racing, 21% for slots. This is going to be really, really hard for racing because, first of all, I think we've got quite a bit of ground to make up with the Labour government. We've had a strong partnership, or racing has had a strong partnership with Tory politicians and governments over the last couple of decades. And the difficulty with this, when the government has rowed back and needs money because it's rowed back on PIP and universal credit, most politicians are going to find it a hell of a sight easier to get behind a tax on quote-unquote greedy bookmakers than they are seeking other ways of doing
Racing's
it.
been trying to get in ahead and say, as Dan Carden conceded on this sofa and Brant Dunshane nearly agreed with, they've been lobbying to say, right, yeah, go on, hammer them for the casino games, raise that, and then we can keep our taxation level the same and it won't cost the sport 66 million a year. Are the government going to buy that?
Dave's hit the right point about political expediency. The government are going in effectively, passing the cap round, looking for anything that they can yield some revenue, and human nature says you try to do that in the place that's going to create the least dissension, which of course this government so far has fundamentally failed with, created dissension in their own ranks, got things almost over the line and then backtracked. I think from racing's perspective, we just have to stand our ground about the difference between games of chance and games of skill. You know, my involvement in racing comes from the fact that I find trying to solve the 5 furlong handicap at Thirsk one of the most fascinating intellectual experiences, and I think it's extremely healthy. Gambling has been touted as being this dirty word in the last 5 years or so, and yet I sit there and I listen to the "it could be you" adverts, and when we have athletes at the Olympics being funded by the National Lottery, whose returns are far worse than racing, and I just feel that, you know, it really is trying to draw a line into the sand to say this contributes a lot to the economy. It is not a bad pastime. There are people who have issues with gambling the same way there are issues in other forms of society, and they need addressing. But to try to sort of just believe we're getting the best of the bad deal by painting the whole thing as being bad, particularly against other sports. You know, racing should not get a concession and other sports go up. It should be the whole thing about betting be an acceptable pastime if adopted sensibly, and that is where we've lost the battle at the moment.
But is it right for racing to say that other forms of gambling or betting are effectively saying they are unacceptable pastimes? You should go and tax them more heavily because those pastimes are less worthy and noble than betting on our sport. You're getting into quite a complex moral maze.
But
then,
I think the differentiation of games of chance
and games of skill, rather than saying X is bad and X is good.
Certainly not one sport being better than another sport. I think that's where the dividing line comes. It is the slots where, you know, it is that roulette wheel. That's the easiest way, isn't it? Keep spinning it. There's a 0 on there. You're going to lose. Now, with games of skill, then at least there is an element of, you know, getting involved. It's not just well, for me, it's not just a pastime, is it? And, you know, I appreciate it's difficult, but for me, who comes from a racing and finding it the most fascinating intellectual challenge, I find it really demeaning to have it reduced to something that is only, you stop me having my own personal enjoyment because of the fact that somehow it's been tarnished and misrepresented.
And the sport here, of course, when fixed odds betting terminals were driving so much of the turnover for high street betting shops, and the sports media rights here were at that time yoked to how many betting shops there were and what pictures were going into those betting shops. We were entirely contingent on what money went into those fixed odds betting terminals. In America, Churchill Downs have just announced nearly $1 billion worth of profit or $1 billion worth of profit over the quarter or whatever, and everyone's cheering that, almost entirely contingent on historic horse racing machines, so effectively slot machines. You know, the sport cannot seem to operate with the same, you know, ethical voice from one jurisdiction to the next.
I think it's really important that, particularly in the media, we do what we can to defend and trumpet one's involvement with horse racing, betting, sports betting as a positive thing. I think it's something that Chris Cook does very well in the Racing Post. And as you say, the National Lottery, when that was launched in '94, the government at the time were talking about an innocent flutter and all this sort of thing. And over the last 3 decades, of course, the picture with regard to betting on horse racing, it has become a dirty word. And it's something I think that it's incumbent upon all of us in that sense to push back on that and try and stress as as forcefully as we can, that this is something that has enriched not only our lives, but the generation above us. You know, my mother got into horse racing through me. She would probably be at the time in her 60s. She's now 93, and for most of those decades, she's been enriched by her life's been enriched by watching the racing, having a bet. It's something that I don't think we push forcefully enough.
Yeah, I just think it is that hypocrisy side of things with the lottery, and I do just think this is where we need to get more on the front foot and have the positive impacts of it. I do understand from MP's point of view, if all you've had is, you know, horrible experiences for people addicted to gambling in your inbox and you're looking for money, it seems a cheap win. But it isn't a cheap win when the industry provides support for so many people and is not the negative pastime that it's portrayed to be in lots of areas.
And I think rather than trying to sort of draw this sort of big moral distinction between various forms of gaming, I think the absolutely key point is how many people does this sport employ? You know, how important are racecourses to those constituencies? How do they act as a societal hub? What do they do for people's, you know, mental and physical well-being? What does the sport contribute? Keep it positive, and hopefully we'll have an outcome that the sport deserves and demands. Right. Paul Nicholls has not had an outcome that he's particularly deserved or demanded over the last few days, because there's been a bit of an exodus of good horses out of his yard. Horses owned by Gordon and Sue Hall, including Guineas Destiny, the most high-profile one, has a couple of nice young horses. And perhaps, you know, the most painful one was Cabral du Matin, who's joined Dan Skelton, which is probably rubbing salt into the wound. Neither of them really wanted to comment initially. Paul Nicholls, who will always comment really when he's asked, has eventually, and said, you know, I've been around long enough, I'm broad-shouldered enough, on we go. Hard to know what's going through those owners' minds, David, particularly owners of Cabral du Matin, but it probably shows you that training racehorses is not just about the results you achieve on the track, I guess. Yeah,
I think that's right. There's been lots of comment about how this would affect Paul Nicholls going forward. I mean, is this not just a case that this sort of thing happens? It happened with Jim Lewis, went from Hen Knight to Paul Nicholls. I think Clive Smith would have gone from Pipe to Nicholls, probably back in the day.
Jetty Pittman to Pipe to Nicholls, I think.
Right. And these things happen. I mean, for Paul Nicholls, I would be less concerned about... I mean, Guineas Destiny is a 3-time Cheltenham winner, but didn't manage to win in the last season. I suppose this is just from his perspective with regard to pushing for a 15th title that would equal Martin Pipe. I think that it's a question... A lot of the big spenders in that yard recently are elderly men, aren't they? And I think that it's his biggest task is to be able to add to those people with younger blood and younger owners, and can convince them that in his 60s he's still got the drive and the thrust behind him that Dan Skelton, who's just a mini Nicholls, has got.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's indicative of something that's going to gain weight, because if you look at the profile of those traditional yards, Paul Nicholls, Nicky Henderson, Alan Keane, downsized to 1 yard, they are not getting any younger. And you've got that transition over to a Harry Derham, Dan Skelton, there'll be other names I'm going to miss, Jamie Snowden, you know, who are a younger generation coming through. And so that shift will naturally tend to happen. Paul will be well aware of that. He still has some nice young horses. Others have taken that different route. The key point I'm going to make is that they don't really have heirs. Whereas you've got Nigel Twiston-Davis, who's gone with Willie. John Joe's got AJ on the licence. So it's going to be quite difficult for those trainers as they get older to maintain as many horses. It's just a natural transition to younger blood, and so it's going to be...
Although Guineas Destiny's gone to Nicky Henderson, the entirely ageless Nicky Henderson, who's either got some kind of cryogenic chamber in his house or...
But where will all those horses go in X number of years' time? Because X is not a huge number.
Willie Mullins. We probably should have had this higher up the order, but the Gambling Commission's Andrew Rhodes has written a blog this week in which he's talked about big corporation account restrictions and the impact they're having on punters. It's a bit of a breakout from the Gambling Commission, and is it, I wonder, Richard, a first sign that they're beginning to take the responsibilities laid down for them on their statute a bit more seriously, i.e. they are actually supposed to be an organisation that look after the interests of people who enjoy betting, as well as just policing the operators?
Yes, I mean, hopefully so, for sure, because up until now, as I've said before on this programme and elsewhere, the approach of the Gambling Commission has been the only way of reducing problem gambling has been just to reduce gambling, full stop, and that way you reduce problem gambling. It's about time that this sort of information was put into the public domain. There are still some requirements to ask. I think, was it 4.31% of accounts? It didn't say whether or not they were multiple accounts, as in, or whether they were used, they were active accounts, but whether they were being used for more than just sort of the one-off coups, which of course is what, you know, shrewd punters do in terms of having more than one account. But account restrictions are a blight on our industry, 100%. And even though I'm slightly naive in always having campaigned for a minimum bet across the board, I still do that with the belief that if you take a licence out, then you should lay to a certain degree. And if that was across the board as part of your licence, then we wouldn't have as many issues. I know that bookmakers will come back with lots of different responses, but fundamentally that would be my starting point. Maybe I'm naive, but just if I said, well, I love the interest of the game, then you should be able to get on, albeit to a reasonable amount.
The anti-gambling lobby is using horse racing at the moment. Let's make no bones about it. It is exploiting and using horse racing for its own ends in the current taxation debate. Would it not be beneficial now for the major betting companies, Dave, to use racing to its own advantage by trying to win hearts and minds better by adopting a much more nuanced approach to how it lays bets and to whom, and also to just not try and use affordability checks to its own advantage?
Well, yes, is the short answer to that. But the Gambling Commission has empowered bookmakers to behave in this way. 650,000 accounts restricted, according to the Gambling Commission's own figures. Interestingly, this was in 2024. That's a figure of 4.31%. The Racing Post figures in their own surveys are significantly higher than that. You know, it's sort of...
That's because it's percentage of accounts that are actually being used.
But also, yes, with the, you know, and also, of course, the actual population that are being asked in those circumstances are going to be very different.
But, you know, bookmakers should earn their... It's something that irritates the hell out of me, that, you know, there are... we have Sunday, or we had a trial of Sunday evening racing that was the reason that came into being was because the data from bookmakers was that this was a good thing, and bookmakers should earn their seat at the table when it comes to things like that, and they earn that by playing fair. Andrew Rhodes said, it is not in our remit to mandate how operators handle their commercial liabilities, but we do have a statutory responsibility to ensure that gambling is conducted in a fair and open manner. Well, it's got a lot of work to do.
It's fair to say the clarity from the Gambling Commission as to how bookmakers should interpret that has left an awful lot to be desired, which is why we've always had the Wild West, really, of everyone going off implementing their own different ways of doing it, rather than say this is what your responsibility is if you require affordability checks or account restrictions. But then you also have the industry hiding slightly behind single customer view, for example, you know, which obviously has a good base in solving problem gambling, but means that your details are shared across the industry when you open accounts.
They're not running a charity, and they're not obliged to lay anybody any bet at any time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business, or they wouldn't. That part of their business wouldn't be profitable. However, if you have an account shut, you are entitled to know why.
Yes, and I do believe that, you know, part of offering yourself to trade is not to be as selective as they have been. You know, bookmaking. I know I'm going back to a day when bookmaking used to be an art. Now it's an algorithm. And too many accounts are closed prematurely with you just happenstance that you ended up back in the same horse as somebody else who probably was smart and might have been abusing the system.
I know that we're going on. These are.
We need to go.
But that's it. But that's the strangest thing about the modern age, isn't it? Like, you know, I used to work my first job was doing a board in a betting shop in Bedford, and it was owned by one man who had 3 or 4 shops in the town, and every time some Flash Harry came in and won a few quid, he'd chew this cigar disgusting it was. He had a can of Holsten Pils in one hand, cigars. He'll be back. He'll be back. And of course, this guy was back, and he did it. You know, that long term. It comes back to that long-term view of your business, whereby, I mean, the first time it happened to me, which was a long time ago now, I'd lost a lot of money on that account, and they just said, "Well, you've beaten the prices." I'm like, well, okay.
But that's not the point, isn't it? You know, I'd say, sorry, we're going off on tangent again, but you know, all of these artificial, you know, best odds guaranteed and things like that. If I take the wrong price, I expect it to drift. I don't need that safety net. That shouldn't be part of it. Just offer me value prices, lay a bet to a reasonable amount. I know that is an outdated view, but it still remains the principle of bookmaking, rather than just following prices on exchanges, which now don't have the liquidity, or, as I say, running it more like a computer-generated product.
Right, I'm being yelled at to move
sorry,
on. The bell's done a lot of heavy lifting today, or not. Publish is the name of a horse who won at Sandown the other day on his second start for John and Thady Gosden, son of Kingman.
Yeah,
wins the Guineas next year, doesn't he?
The last
Judmont, Gosden.
The last two talking points. I don't think we'll go over too much. Yeah, this is the Martin Densham and Peter Deal Memorial Maiden Stakes. It was run over 7 furlongs at Sandown Park on Thursday, and it produced a winner in Publish who was...
It's been won by Ruling Court.
Yeah, Ruling Court and Kamiko as well.
Nostrum was a good winner of it as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in beating
race standard.
Catullus by a length and a quarter, Publish is now 10 to... This is partly because the... thus far, the Aidan O'Brien juveniles are either thought of as sprinters or the ones that might be Guineas horses. There's been a bit of a bump in the road. So he's now the Guineas favourite at 10 to 1. But the horse they beat, Catullus, had run well at the July meeting, and Publish had shown promise at Sandown the time before, but it was baffling, I thought, that he should be the new Guineas favourite.
Yeah, not much to add. Again, the association, do you believe a race standard derives the prices that should come out of it? Or a bit like we were saying with our McCammon Ombudsman, are you tainted by the association that's won it before you? Publish, of course, had been such a massive eye-catcher as well first time when he got beat, that then you're expecting him to really step forward. He stepped forward to a degree, but I didn't sit and watch that race and think, wow, he's going to be Guineas favourite, so Publish and be damned.
Was Nostrum Guineas favourite after he won it?
Probably.
He probably was.
John Gosden did talk quite a bit before this year's 2,000 Guineas about the fact that it wasn't something that preoccupied him that he hadn't won a 2,000 Guineas. I bet it is now.
You know, you need to know where they're going and all of that, but yeah. Look, it's designed, isn't it, to float the boat, and you are winding Dave up slightly to a degree, and bookmakers are winding us up slightly to a degree, aren't they, by talking about the race on, you know, quiet day.
I'll tell you what, we were hoping to have Derek Thompson in the studio today, but he is commentating in Jersey, so he hasn't really retired at all. But this has been a farewell tour to end all farewell tours, and it's not really farewell. But it's been an amazing career behind the mic for Tommo.
Look, you and I have both worked with him, and you know from a professional point of view, he is one who can produce quality television, make people feel like the most important person in the world over 30 or 40 years. I'm really pleased.
More, probably, yeah.
I'm sure it is more, but in my time at least, when I've worked with him for that duration, I'm pleased he went out in a way that he felt was entirely appropriate, and because that, you know, was beginning to be a little bit in the balance after a couple of below par calls that he would have admitted. He is 75. I won't be anywhere near commentating when I'm that age. It requires far more intellect that I'm going to have come there. Look, and I say, he's entitled to go out exactly how he wishes. And I very briefly chatted to him yesterday. He had a really great day, and that's really important. So fair play, can't ask for any more than that. If you can go out on your own terms and reflect that it's about the right time, that's fair enough by me.
Yeah, it's 60 years commentating. It seemed like longer now and again, but it's Derek Thompson is a survivor who has reinvented his role in the racing media several times. He's coped with severe personal difficulties, if that's not a way to describe a cancer diagnosis, professional problems too, and so I mean he deserves our admiration for that. I must say, and when my time comes, I'll just get canned by my newspaper group, and I won't be able to get any work. So that sort of 6-month lap of honour that sort of Henry Blofeld had, and all the rest of them, it's not really for me. Give me Dickie Johnson any day of the week. 0 from 6, was it, at Hereford, and then on a Saturday afternoon, and says, "Cheers, guys, that's me." That's the way to do it.
Tommo and out. Those were this week's talking points.